At the David J. Apple Laboratory, over the last decades, several techniques were developed to look inside the eye using human autopsy eyes, evaluating new implants and new surgical techniques. The first and most famous technique is the so-called Miyake Apple Posterior View video technique, where you can see the capsular bag and the zonules and the ciliary body from behind. Second technique was developed by Ehud Asiya and was called the side view or keyhole technique. Third technique was developed by myself, the so-called closed system technique. Technique number 4 was developed by Guy Kleinman, the so-called endoscopic view. A new technique developed in Heidelberg just recently is the J. Apple technique, which focused on an isolated capsular bag. There are new special devices for AMD patients for cataract surgery. Implantable miniature telescope. How can we get this kind of implant into the eye of a patient? First, cataract surgery is performed as usual. Then we use a T-Cert IS system to deliver the lens in a specific cartridge. We load it with viscoelastic. We attach the delivery device, and then the telescope is pushed forward into the implantation syringe. You can see here the black ring. This is the implant. We fill it up with viscoelastic and then go to the patient's eye, where we have prepared a 7 mm scleral incision, as you can see here. You go pretty much forward here in front of the capsulotomy and try to push the whole telescope directly inside the capsular bag. Now you can see the lens well centered in the middle of the capsular axis, as you can see here. This large incision has to be sutured with 10-0 nylon with a cross suture. Let's go now in the David J. Apple Laboratory and analyze this new implantable telescope in the human autopsy eye. So now we are looking at this device with the Miyake Apple view, and you can see how nicely it unfolds inside the capsular bag. Let us repeat this in slow motion. All 3 haptics come out very smoothly and are targeted directly into the capsular bag. There's not really much stress on the zonules, as you can see here, and the lens is centered very nicely. Let's do some complication management. What happened if one haptic stays out of the bag in the sulcus, like here? It is fairly easy to push this haptic inside the capsular bag, as you can see here. We just need 2 spatula and put some counter pressure on it to put it in the capsular bag. Now we can rotate the device. Or let's go the worst case, the whole implantation in the sulcus, so none of the haptics are inside the capsular bag. Still, because of the flexibility, we can put each of this haptic inside the capsular bag. There is some kind of zonular dehiscence, as you can see here, or zonular stress, let's put it this way. But it's doable, and the lens implant complex is then nicely centered in the capsular bag. Here the 3rd haptic is pushed into the capsular bag. So you see the good centering. But what if we have to explant this? Can we also explant the haptics? Well, with the same technique, with counter pressure, you can actually also take this haptics out of the capsular bag. The stress is not much more to the zonules than we saw in the implantation. We need good viscoelastic in the capsular bag, and then we can remove this with, for example, a Doden forceps, as you can see here, through the incision. But do we need to explant all 3 haptics of the IMT device? No, we don't. It's enough if we just take one haptic out and use this to get the lens out of the capsular bag, as you can see here. So, apart from intraocular lens devices, also posterior segment surgical procedures or implants can be analyzed. Let's have a look now at the injection of silicone oil and how we can improve this kind of procedure. So let's do our in vitro experiment. Silicone oil injection depends on the diameter of the cannula, the length and the temperature. We tested all kinds of silicone oils in this study. In addition, we tested a new cannula made of polyimide versus the standard cannula. You can see here the Miyake Apple Posterior View as well as the endoscopic view, and you see the yellow polyimide cannula, and you see the silicone oil coming in, and we looked at a certain amount of silicone oil injected in a certain time frame. Shear viscosity of the oils decreased slightly with temperature, but it only helped us by 9% reducing the injection time. Much more efficient was the new cannula. We could reduce the injection time by 70% using this new cannula made from polyimide. So I hope you have had an interesting inside view of these new technologies and devices. As you can see at the David J. Apple Laboratory, we are also evaluating posterior segment procedures and devices. We will go on in more detail on these topics in another episode of CSI Heidelberg.